It's great to welcome to the program today Nicholas Kristof, columnist for the New York Times, also author of the new memoir, Chasing Hope, A Reporter's Life. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks.
Great to be with you.
So, listen, I've tried to be as honest as I can with my audience at every point in this election based on all of the information that's known to me about what I think is likely and what I think is best in what I think is the important effort to prevent Donald Trump from serving another term. If I understand your latest position correctly, it seems that you recognize the great achievements of President Biden in this first term and believe that it would not be the best thing for him to be the Democratic nominee this time around. Fair assessment?
Exactly. Yeah. And I say that with sadness. I've known Biden for decades. I admire him. He had a great term, but the reason he was chosen 4 years ago was that he could win. And that is not true this time, I believe.
Who do you think, if anyone, prevented this conversation from becoming as real and urgent as it seems to be today, with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, et cetera, saying that the time may have come? Should this conversation have happened sooner? And if so, why do you think it did not?
Well, it clearly should have. And, I think that the job of campaign and aides and White House aides has tended to be to protect whoever is the occupant of that post, and so they protect that person by not making them available for tough interviews and not making them available in the evening, etc. And they thought that they could carry this through until November, and it might have worked. Biden does seem to be on most of the time, but he's off enough of the time that there was a risk of a catastrophe, and that happened in the first debate.
Was your opinion before the debate, or let me put it a different way? If you look at someone like Alan Lichtman, his framework essentially disregards what happened at the debate. Not 100%, but close to it, arguing it doesn't change the structural foundation of incumbency, the state of the economy, et cetera. I'm curious your take in terms of how much that debate on June 27th changed your perspective.
That changed my perspective, overwhelmingly. Until then, I had thought that Republicans were exaggerating the impact of his age. I thought that they were, we saw these kind of fake clips where they seemed to have to rely on this artificiality to suggest that he was senile or something. And then in that first debate, there was a horrifying sense that, wow, he really does suffer from cognitive capacity problems at least some of the time, and it's hard to know how often, but that he will not be an effective candidate. And also, it's not just about politics, that one has to be concerned about what will happen if there is a foreign policy crisis in the middle of the night. And I think he has great aides around him who I think would help. But fundamentally, you want the president himself to be coherent at 2 a.m. And I think were real doubts about that. Before the end of the debate, I had tweeted um, that President Biden should withdraw from the race because it was so apparent that this just could not continue.
How do arguments like, and I'll give you a list of them, arguments like, I don't vote for debate performance, I vote for performance in the Oval Office and it's been good. Or if you read a transcript of the debate, it's 90% better. Or those sorts of reactions. How do those strike you?
So I don't buy the bad debate night kind of argument, that uh, fundamentally what we saw was not just a bad debate. This was the worst debate in the history of debates going back to 1960. And it showed not just slowness, it showed some kind, it just showed a real cognitive impairment. We had a convicted felon who was inarticulate, who's a weak candidate, who beat Joe Biden, who, I've known as a smart guy. And as for the point that he had a great first term, I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. But in homes across the country, we have these difficult conversations with elderly parents about taking away the car keys. And those parents, they insist, I can drive. I'm not going far. Look, I haven't had a ticket in X years. I haven't had a crash. But what happens in the last 4 years is not a good predictor of what's going to happen in the next 4 years. And if every household in the country can have the responsibility to have these difficult conversations with elderly people whom they love, then I think the Democratic Party has to be able to have that conversation as well.
So, according to some reports, the conversation is being had and the reaction from the president is being described as defensive. I want to kind of call your attention back to the press conference that President Biden recently gave. He indicated that if he was told by advisors, you cannot win, that would influence him not to proceed. In a more recent interview, I believe it was with BET, he said, if a medical professional told me, here's a medical reason why you should not or could not continue, that would influence him. Nancy Pelosi is reportedly telling him, you cannot win. And it's not that COVID means you can't be president, but the timing now of the COVID diagnosis during the RNC after Trump's failed assassination attempt is putting together certainly a bad week in terms of optics, I would say, for President Biden. Do you think by the standards he laid out at that press conference, he has now reached a point at which he should be acknowledging he can't win? Or do you not think that the polling story is quite so clear?
So, first of all, I think I wouldn't quite take the bar that he set for himself, either on polling or medical care, quite so seriously. Look, anybody in his position can't acknowledge uncertainty until the moment they announce they're stepping out. I mean, the moment they acknowledge, well, I'll figure it out, then, then nobody will take them seriously and everybody will expect them to step down. So
Right.
I don't know what what Joe and Jill are talking about privately or, with Mike Donilon and others. But I I think the bar that he he has no chance of winning. I mean, that's an absurd bar. I mean, there's always going to be a 1 or 5% or 10% chance that somebody's going to win. And of course, that's possible in his case. He might win. I just think it's very unlikely, and I'm not willing to take that risk for the country. We with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we took that kind of a risk, and the country lost. And I don't want to take that at a time when I think Biden is right about the threat that Trump poses. And, it's Congress is also at stake. This fundamentally isn't about Biden. It's about the future of the country.
What do you imagine the replacement process that would least upset the primary voters that voted for President Biden would be, in the sense that depending on who the replacement would be, and there are those who say the only real path to a replacement is Kamala Harris, at least she's part of this administration. That's not the only view. What do you imagine the process would look like to best set up whoever that person is to win in November?
So I would hope that it would not be simply defaulting to Kamala Harris. I think that she is certainly a possibility to inherit the post of nominee. But after all, it's not a given that a vice president takes over as nominee. And in 2016, it obviously was not Joe Biden as vice president who became the nominee, but rather it went to Hillary Clinton, partly because she was thought to be a better nominee. Now, in fact, I think that was a miscalculation, and those are possible. But I don't think it should automatically go to her. And I think that if there were an open convention, then immediately all the potential candidates would be holding press conferences, would be raising money, would be giving interviews.
And by
And
open convention, you mean Biden says, I release all of my delegates, but I'm
correct.
not saying give them all to Kamala Harris. It will truly be open.
That's correct. That's correct. And then, and then, and I mean, there is I think there have been a lot of comparisons to, oh, this would be chaotic like 1968 and this kind of thing. I don't quite buy that. I mean, 1968 was chaotic because of the violence outside the convention,
Yes.
not because of the votes within it. And I think that there would be a real yearning on the part of Democrats to find a nominee who can win. I think everybody is pretty focused on the need to win. Um, I think that Gretchen Whitmer might be the nominee who would be most likely to win. I think that if she were paired with somebody like Cory Booker, that would be a pretty powerful combination. I think of Whitmer as somebody who would be in a good position to win Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Booker has the highest net approval ratings of any of the, plausible candidates. I think that would be a good team. Um, People have raised the question of whether African American voters would be, would feel left out with Kamala not getting the nod.
Right.
I I think that's a risk. But I think that, look, I mean, 4 years ago, it was African American voters who fundamentally gave the nod to Biden because they thought he was the one best able to beat Trump. And I think that, whether voters are black, white, or brown, if they're Democrats, they probably want to beat Trump.
It seems that there's risk at this point, no matter what. It seems at this point it's undeniable that Joe Biden remaining the nominee carries with it significant risk. It seems excluding Kamala Harris from whatever would be the new ticket has risk in and of itself. You can argue that if this is going to happen, the longer it takes, the more risk there is because time becomes tighter and tighter before the eventual convention and ultimately the election. If you were advising the path forward on this, do you say as soon as possible? Do you say wait until the convention? What would your advice be?
Um, so I would like to see Biden withdraw right after the Republican convention. In other words, the Republican convention fires its entire arsenal at Biden, and then it turns out he's actually not going to be the nominee
Mm.
after all, and then choose the nominee at the convention, which gives the public and delegates several weeks to take the measure of the candidate, several weeks for investigative reporters and rival researchers to dig up dirt on them. Some have been a little more vetted, some a little less vetted, but I think that that vetting, is important. I think they should be under pressure, and see where that goes and see what donors think. And I think that I'm sort of skeptical of the notion that just because somebody is relatively new on the scene and doesn't have a big national following, that they are hopeless. I think there is a yearning for sometimes for fresh faces. Um, we've seen sometimes how candidates just come out of nowhere and instantly surge in the polls. You think of like Ben Carson, who
Yep.
nobody had heard of 1 week, and then 2 weeks later, he's the Republican favorite. And so I think that. Um, you know, I think it is possible for Democrats to end up backing somebody who is not necessarily a well-known national figure, and then managing to unify the party behind them because of this widely felt mandate about the need to beat Biden, to beat Trump.
You've made clear what you think should happen. Now, as far as what you expect to happen, if you I'm not a betting man, maybe you are, maybe you're not. At this point, do you think the most likely outcome here is that come November, Joe Biden is not the Democratic nominee?
I think things are shifting by the moment. Um, I think that if I'm not a betting person either, but I think I actually just might bet right now that Biden will withdraw. And I think, I mean, this is what an awful week. I think the assassination attempt on Trump unfortunately underscored the Trump narrative that he is this strong guy who takes on challenges and emerges unscathed.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Biden was trying to show his resilience and strength and ended up with COVID. You know, it Biden talked about how he might drop out if the Lord Almighty advised him to do so, and I just couldn't help thinking that maybe this was the Lord Almighty, you know, whispering into Biden's ear.
I mean, it's interesting that Trump supporters certainly see the trajectory of the bullet as divine intervention. So it seems everybody is sort of looking for messages.
Yeah,
I get all we can do at this point is wait, and to call it an unfortunate situation feels like an understatement, given what's riding on the election.
yeah, but you know, compared to a few weeks ago, I do think that it is actually more likely now that Democrats will win in November, and that that will be a real rebuke to Trump and to Trumpism. And if Trump loses, you know, loses the popular vote 3 times in a row, loses the election twice in a row, then, you know, maybe that will have some Republicans kind of going the Liz Cheney route and sort of rethinking the craziness that has occupied so much of the GOP. So there is a sliver up. My book was Chasing Hope, so I'm chasing hope here, and I think there is a thread of hope that one can. There's a path forward, and whether or not the country will take it, we don't know.
We've been speaking with Nicholas Kristof. The new memoir is Chasing Hope, A Reporter's Life, and we will link to it. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Good to be with you. Take care.